Brian told me his brother's family would be moving in with us next week, like he was ordering takeout, not altering the entire fabric of my life. No conversation, no compromise, just a cheerful, "they'll only be here a while." That while came with boxes, noise, and judgmental stares from his sister-in-law. I gave up my office, my morning silence, my name on the mortgage. But I smiled. I cooked dinner. I nodded politely. And while they claimed every room in my house, I quietly bought a new one, signed, sealed, and untouchable. Sometimes silence isn't surrender. Sometimes it's strategy. And I had just begun mine. Brian always knew how to look perfect in photos. That was part of his charm, the polished frame he wore like a second skin. When Modern Home and Life ran our feature as the power couple who balance love and finance, he grinned wide and held my hand like he meant it. The photo shoot had been staged in our sunlit kitchen. His idea, of course. He'd spent hours choosing my outfit, correcting my posture, brushing my hair from my face like a loving husband doting on his wife. What the magazine didn't capture was how I hadn't seen my best friend in 4 months. Brian said she had toxic energy, or how I now ordered the same food he liked because trying anything else became a 30-minute conversation about compatibility. He didn't yell. He didn't insult. He suggested, gently, repeatedly, until I began forgetting what I liked to eat, where I liked to go, and what silence sounded like without the hum of his preferences buzzing through it. He was proud of my career. My wife is a genius with money, he'd boast. But he was also the one who recommended we simplify our investments and merge accounts for efficiency. I had spreadsheets to track every cent, but he'd smile and kiss my forehead, whispering, "Trust me, sweetheart. Just enjoy life more." And I wanted to. I wanted to believe that this man who rubbed my feet while I worked late into the night, who brought me tea in my office and bought me lilies on Wednesdays, really did have our best interest at heart. Love isn't supposed to feel this confusing. That confusion cracked open on a Tuesday evening. I just finished a client debrief when Brian strolled into my office. Technically still mine, though lately he'd started referring to it as the spare room, with a casual air and a glass of wine. He didn't knock. "I got some exciting news," he said, smiling like he'd won a prize. "Oh?" I closed my laptop. "Did your promotion come through?" "Better," he said, sitting on the edge of my desk. "We're letting Matt and Lisa move in with us." I blinked. "Excuse me?" "They're in a tough spot," he explained. "Matt lost another job and Lisa's struggling with the kids. It's just temporary." My mouth opened, then closed. I felt the room shift, like the furniture had suddenly changed positions and no one told me. "You're saying they're moving in here?" He laughed. "Of course. Where else would they go? This place is perfect. We've got the extra room and it's not like we're using the den where I store all my archived contracts and financial records, the den I retreat to when I need to think." I steadied my voice. "When were you going to talk to me about this?" He frowned, as if I'd just questioned the necessity of air. "I'm telling you now. Come on, Mads. You always say family matters." I did. I said that often. But I meant our family, the one we were building. "Just for a while," he repeated. "It'll be fun. The kids will bring energy to the house. And Lisa could use a break. You know how much she admires you." Admiration. Lisa once told me that my minimalist kitchen felt soulless. She laughed, but it stung. And Matt, he was charming in a used car salesman way, but he'd borrowed money from half the family and never paid it back. The last time I saw him, he said something about crypto and trust me, it's going to explode. I stood up, walked to the window. The city lights sparkled like scattered diamonds, and I realized I hadn't felt ownership of this view in months. "How long will they be staying?" I asked, barely above a whisper. Brian wrapped his arms around me from behind. "Couple of months, tops, and if they need longer, we'll figure it out. You and I always do." I didn't speak. I didn't nod. I didn't scream. Instead, I smiled, Because that night, after he'd gone to bed, I logged into the digital deed records for our house. Curiosity, maybe hope, and I saw it. Ownership. Brian Carter and Madeline Carter. Joint tenancy with rights of survivorship. The joint title hadn't always been there. I remembered buying this house myself before we got married. I paid the down payment. I signed the paperwork. My name had stood alone. Until it didn't. And the date of change. 3 months ago. Right around the time he surprised me with that romantic spa weekend. I closed the laptop slowly. Sometimes silence isn't surrender. Sometimes it's just gathering fuel. The morning they moved in, I made cinnamon rolls from scratch. Lisa looked surprised. "You bake?" "Sometimes," I replied, pouring coffee into matching mugs I'd bought just for this occasion. "Thought it might make your first morning feel a little more warm." She smirked. "That's cute. Matt likes his with extra icing." I made a mental note, not about the icing, but about her tone. The entitlement wasn't new, but now it lived under my roof. Matt dropped a duffel bag directly onto my favorite armchair. Their kids ran wild, knocking over a vase Brian's mother had given us. He laughed, told them to burn off that energy. I picked up the shards silently. By evening, the house felt like it had grown smaller. My office became a shared playroom. The guest bath, once pristine, reeked of cheap cologne and moldy towels. My yoga mat disappeared. So did my solitude. Brian praised me constantly. "See? I knew you'd be amazing at this. You're such a natural hostess." I smiled every time. I smiled when Lisa used my $60 organic shampoo. I smiled when Matt asked me to check his crypto portfolio and then winked like we were sharing some secret. I smiled as I switched out the batteries on the hidden camera inside the hallway mirror. I'd installed 5. 1 in the kitchen, 2 in common areas, 1 in my former office, 1 in the vent above the hallway where conversations happened when they thought no one was listening. Every night after the chaos dimmed, I'd download the footage. No rage, no tears, just quiet documentation. The kind of diligence I learned from working in finance. Track everything, question nothing, until the time is right. Meanwhile, I let them settle into the illusion. I stopped locking drawers. I left my laptop open, spreadsheets flashing across the screen. I watched Lisa try to copy formulas onto a USB drive when she thought I wasn't home. I watched Matt on a phone call saying, "She's got access to high-net clients. Give me a month." Brian, of course, saw none of it. He called me strong in front of friends and delicate in private. He told Lisa, "Madeline's too soft-hearted to ever say no." I watched him say that from the recording dated Wednesday, 3:42 p.m., time-stamped clearly as he stood outside our bedroom. That was the night I created a new LLC, Allowance Strategies, named after my mother, the only person who ever taught me how to fight gently. The registration was clean, legal, and untraceable, back to our joint finances. I used a holding company registered in Montana. The paperwork was dry, but the thrill was electric. I began shifting accounts, not recklessly, but surgically. Clients I had personally brought into our shared business received invitations for exclusive insight calls. I never mentioned Brian. Instead, I told them I was restructuring my consulting process to serve a higher impact niche. The response was overwhelming. By the end of the second week, 9 clients had signed over with me. Quietly, confidently. Brian didn't notice. He thought I was adjusting to domestic life. "You've been so relaxed lately," he said one night as he massaged my shoulders. "I knew this would be good for you." I turned, kissed his cheek, and said, "You were right." That same night, Lisa left a browser window open on my laptop. She'd been searching how to legally claim inheritance if sister-in-law dies childless. I screenshot it, stored it, labeled it contingency. 3 days later, I moved my personal savings into a trust, under a loan. I shifted assets into low-visibility portfolios, diversified, dispersed. What Brian thought was shared had been reduced to the dust of a paper trail no one could follow. And then I made the final move. I restructured our joint firm's digital architecture. I embedded a kill switch. If triggered, by voice, by code, or by breach, access to all client records would revert to Elauan strategies, severing Brian from years of accumulated networks. He wouldn't know it was me. He'd think the system crashed, unless I wanted him to know. I closed my laptop. The night was unusually still. In the distance, I could hear Matt laughing at some TV show, Lisa on speakerphone with her mother, trash-talking my cooking. I stepped outside, into the chill air, let the silence settle over me like armor. Some women burn it all down. Some of us just build a better empire, one silent foundation at a time. And Brian, I would let him keep the house, because I planned to take the market. It started with the missing cashmere blanket. A small thing, really. One of those unnecessary luxuries I'd bought during a conference trip to Milan. Soft dove gray embroidered with my initials. I found it stuffed inside one of Matt's gym bags, wedged between a pair of running shoes and a half-eaten protein bar. I didn't ask. The next day, my Japanese chef's knives disappeared. Lisa claimed they must have accidentally ended up in one of her boxes during the move. "Easy mix-up," she said, while slicing apples with one in her hand. Brian laughed when I brought it up. "You're being territorial," he said. "They're family. What's a knife or two?" What indeed? The house was no longer a home. It was a colony. Their kids scribbled over my notes. My wine fridge was emptied for a party. Lisa ordered groceries and charged them to our shared account. When I raised an eyebrow, Brian said, "Mad, it's not a big deal. They're just trying to get back on their feet." Except they weren't. Matt had asked Brian for money 4 times that week. Lisa wanted us to co-sign a lease on a second car. There were whispers, too loud to ignore, about moving somewhere bigger, somewhere they could finally breathe. And then Lisa said it outright at dinner. "Honestly, if we're all going to be living together long term, maybe it makes sense to put us on the new deed. For fairness." The fork froze halfway to my mouth. Brian didn't object. He didn't look shocked. He just reached for the salt. The mask was cracking. Behind the scenes, Brian had started liquidating some of our co-owned assets. Not enough to alert the bank, but enough to catch my trained eye. He claimed he was streamlining our portfolio, making space for strategic growth. It was dressed in corporate jargon, but the pattern was clear. He was shifting value into a private firm I hadn't seen before, Northview Syndicate LLC, registered in Delaware. Clean, anonymous, intentional. I traced ownership through 3 levels before I found a familiar name, Eva Langston. Eva, my closest friend since college, maid of honor at our wedding, godmother, unofficially, to our non-existent future children. Eva, who had cried with me when my mother passed. I stared at the registration forms for a long time. Her signature was there. So was the date. 2 weeks before Matt and Lisa moved in. The betrayal wasn't loud. It didn't scream. It pulsed, slow and cold like frost inching down the back of your neck. I called her that night. Calm. Civil. "Northview?" I asked. There was silence on the other end. Then a sigh. "It's not what you think." "Then what is it?" "A safety net," she said. "For Brian, for both of you. He said you were getting overwhelmed, that you needed help managing things." "And stealing from me is your idea of help?" Another sigh. "I thought you'd see it differently, Maddie. You've always been practical." I hung up. 2 hours later, I deleted every photo I had of her, every email, every shared document. Then I encrypted a digital folder titled Langston Dossier and archived every piece of evidence I had into a private cloud server. The next morning, I went house hunting. Alone. The real estate agent was young and efficient. She didn't ask questions when I gave her the price range or specified no neighbors within hearing distance. She smiled politely when I said, "I don't need space for guests." She nodded when I asked if the basement had been reinforced. The house was perfect. On a hill, hidden behind a veil of old cypress trees, floor-to-ceiling windows facing nothing but sky, a meditation room wrapped in cedar and silence, a hidden storage vault in the basement with biometric access, a panic room masked as a walk-in closet. No memories, no noise, no Brian. I told the agent I'd pay cash. She didn't blink. That night, I printed a letter and sealed it in an envelope. I slipped it into Brian's office drawer, the one he used for client contracts, the one he assumed I never opened anymore. Inside, the letter was simple. You have underestimated me for the last time. I am not your audience. I am not your apprentice. You want to own everything? Fine. You can keep the house, but I am keeping everything that built it. I didn't sign it. Not yet. I'd let him find it the way he found most things. Too late, too confident. I walked back to our shared bedroom, hours in name only. Brian was asleep, a podcast murmuring through his earbuds. I watched him for a moment, trying to remember if I ever truly loved him, or if I had loved the idea of being loved. Downstairs, Lisa and Matt argued over something. Money again. The kids stomped above me like elephants. My sanctuary was gone. But I had a new one. And soon, he would know just how far I'd moved without ever leaving the room. He would know when the account stopped responding, when the client stopped returning his calls, when the house he thought he conquered felt like an empty trophy. He would beg me to sign the divorce papers, thinking that would end it. But by then, he wouldn't even own the pen. Monday arrived like any other, but I had been planning it for weeks. I rose before dawn, careful not to disturb the breathless quiet of a house, still heavy with sleep. The hallway was dark, save for the nightlight glowing faintly near the children's room. I moved barefoot, like a ghost who had decided to stop haunting her own home. My suitcase was already in the trunk, packed with legal documents, encrypted drives, and 5 silk shirts I didn't want to replace. I didn't leave a note. There was no point. Explanation is a privilege, and no one here had earned that from me. Outside, the car hummed to life. I pulled away without glancing back at the windows. The cypress trees blurred past, and with them, the version of myself that once believed enduring in silence was a form of love. The house on the hill welcomed me like a cathedral. The air was clean, still tinged with fresh paint and intention. I unlocked the biometric gate, passed the security checkpoints I had personally designed, and stepped into a space that had never known shouting or slammed doors or requests for favors masquerading as affection. Everything had been moved in advance, artwork boxed and shipped, furniture arranged by professionals who asked no questions. The documents finalizing the purchase had been processed through a third-party holding account I created months ago. Even if Brian dug into the records, he'd find nothing but a shell, a ghost, just like me. Back at the old house, the footage played. A notification blinked across my phone screen. Motion detected, main entry camera. I tapped it. Matt stood in the living room, blinking at the open front door. Lisa behind him, confused, then angry. She called my name once, twice. Brian appeared moments later, rubbing his eyes, then widening them as he scanned the room. The footage had no sound. I preferred it that way, but I could see the panic bloom. They checked the kitchen, my office, the garage. Then the camera captured Brian finding the drawer open in his study, the letter still untouched. He picked it up, read it, paused, then threw it across the room. The camera shook as something heavy hit the wall. Lisa screamed. I ended the feed. Some things are better not watched twice. That afternoon, I stood in my meditation room, barefoot, wrapped in silence, and wrote the first sentence of my next chapter on a glass board. Power is not taken. It is returned, once you stop asking permission to keep it. In the weeks that followed, I disappeared from their world, but I reappeared in others. I launched the Allowan Project, a private advisory platform for women seeking economic independence. No viral speeches, no hashtags, just tools, resources, contracts, and confidence. We didn't talk about feminism. We practiced financial warfare. We weren't angry. We were prepared. Every module was built from what I had lived through: covert asset protection, shell restructuring, exit strategy design, risk mitigation through silence. The demand exploded. Within a month, my name began circulating in private women's business circles, not as the woman who fled, but as the architect of quiet empires. Brian, meanwhile, resurfaced. He sent an email from his lawyer, the subject line, "Proposed settlement terms." It read like a threat disguised as a favor. He wanted half of everything, claimed I had used marital assets to build my new identity, said I had betrayed the trust foundational to our union, attached screenshots of my LLC, demands for financial disclosures, veiled hints about public exposure. I read the email while sipping coffee in the sunroom, and I laughed, because there was nothing left for him to take. Every asset had already been moved under a protective legal structure, not in my name, but in Elowen's, not liquid, not traceable. All strategic, all separate from what the courts would call commingled marital property. Brian could demand anything, but he would receive nothing. I wrote back a single sentence: "You are free to pursue what no longer exists." No signature, no warmth, just truth. Lisa tried calling twice. I blocked the number. Matt sent a half-hearted message through a mutual contact asking if we could work this out privately. I didn't respond. Silence now was not surrender. It was dominance. The media never found out. No articles, no gossip. That was by design. Brian thrived on perception. I let him keep the illusion, let him lie at barbecues and say she just needed space or we grew apart. I had no desire to correct him. But behind the scenes, the Alowen project grew. Our client base crossed 5,000 by the 6th month. Lawyers, doctors, artists, teachers, women who'd been told to be grateful, who were tired of asking permission to control their own futures. They didn't want slogans. They wanted escape routes. They wanted blueprints, and I gave them mine. In week 10, I received a letter from Brian's lawyer again, this time a last attempt, a desperate offer to reconcile for the good of the family. I opened the envelope. Inside was a photo. Brian sitting in what used to be my office, looking thin, disheveled, defeated. I turned the photo over. On the back, he'd written, "Let's talk before it's too late." I burned it. He had already lost me. What he didn't know, what none of them ever truly understood, was that I was never theirs to keep. There's something beautiful about a collapse when you've already cleared the wreckage in advance. It began with a letter to my attorney. I sent her a curated package: audio recordings from the hidden cameras, screenshots of unauthorized file access, dates and timestamps of every financial transaction Brian made without mutual consent. Included were the backup contracts, receipts, and signed waivers proving that Alowen Strategies had been structured and funded entirely from my premarital individual income. Everything I'd collected, documented, and encrypted over months was now transformed into legal ammunition. My lawyer didn't hesitate. She knew exactly what to do. By the end of that week, we had filed a comprehensive petition, not for divorce, that part was inevitable, but for financial misrepresentation and breach of fiduciary duty. With the evidence I presented, it wasn't just a personal matter anymore. It was criminal exposure. Brian received the summons 2 days later. I wasn't there to see his face, but I imagined it cracked and blank, like the mask had finally split wide open. That same morning, 3 of his largest clients terminated their contracts. One of them, an asset management firm in Connecticut, sent a single sentence: "We don't work with liars." And the dominoes kept falling. By Monday, the media caught wind of the case. It wasn't hard. Someone leaked the public filing. The part where Lisa and Matt were named in an investigation regarding fraudulent grant applications tied to Brian's business account. Apparently, the family support fund Matt had set up was just a clever funnel. Lisa's signature appeared on 4 separate applications, claiming she was a single mother of 3. Each application requested emergency assistance for housing displacement. The irony would have been funny if it weren't so predictable. When the authorities raided their temporary apartment, Matt went live on Facebook sobbing into the camera, accusing me of destroying their lives. He wasn't wrong, but he wasn't right either. I hadn't destroyed anything. I had simply removed the walls they'd built on top of lies. My inbox flooded with requests: journalists, bloggers, financial forums. A well-known TV host wanted me for a primetime segment titled "The Woman Who Beat the Boys at Their Own Game." I declined every offer. Fame was never the goal, but perception, that was useful. An article circulated on LinkedIn titled "The Escape Queen of Wall Street." Another: "She didn't just leave, she leveled up." I didn't repost them, but I saw the comments. Women tagged each other. "Read this. We need to talk. Your situation sounds like hers." That's when I decided to write something real. Not a memoir, not a tell-all. A map. I titled it, "The Emotional Economy: Why Women Need a Plan B That Starts with the Self." It wasn't dramatic. No revenge fantasies or empowerment slogans, just facts, tools, and models. I broke down the mechanics of silence as strategy, how to build financial escape routes in plain sight, how to shift power dynamics through documentation. I wrote about emotional laundering, how abusers hide behind affection. I wrote about the myth of shared goals and the red flags we dress in pink to make palatable. I wrote about myself, but not as a victim, as an operator. The book sold out in pre-orders. Universities requested permission to use it in women's studies and business ethics programs. One business school reached out to offer me a teaching residency. I declined, but I appreciated the ask. Brian, meanwhile, tried to push back. He filed an emergency motion to freeze my business assets. It failed. He hired a crisis management firm. They dropped him after a week. His statement to the press was filled with platitudes: personal matters, misunderstandings, focus on healing. But no one believed him anymore, because I had receipts, timelines, witnesses, because I never shouted. I just exposed. By the 4th month, he was broke. Not in the literal sense. He still had his car, his watch, whatever scraps I left behind. But his credibility burned. Lisa filed for separation, claiming Brian manipulated her into everything. Matt disappeared from social media, then reappeared under a new name peddling coaching services to rebuild your masculine core. The public turned their laughter on them. I turned my silence into momentum. Then came the podcast invite. A host I respected, brilliant, insightful, deeply curious, offered a private studio. No pressure, just a conversation. I turned her down. Not because I didn't have stories to share, but because I'd already told them the only way that mattered, structurally, strategically, silently. Instead, I released the 2nd edition of my guide, expanding on the original concept with a supplemental chapter titled Architect versus Avatar: When the woman they married isn't who you were, but who they built. It trended within hours. Comments poured in. "You said what I never knew how to say. I built a folder after reading this. It saved me." This isn't empowerment, this is architecture. That word stuck. Architecture. I never wanted to tear Brian down. I wanted to unbuild the scaffolding around me that made his behavior seem acceptable. The cracks had always been there. I just stopped filling them, and now the house was gone. One evening, I sat on my porch overlooking the valley, sipping wine made by a woman I'd met through Elowin. She'd left a similar life, different names, same patterns, and built a vineyard from her father's abandoned land. We didn't talk about men. We talked about leverage and legacy. My phone buzzed. A message from a number I recognized but hadn't saved. Brian, you always win, but you don't have to be cruel about it. I didn't respond. I watched the sun slide behind the hills and thought about how quiet the sky looked when no one was asking me to shrink. In the stillness, I whispered to no one in particular, Brian still thinks I'm a game of emotional chess. I smiled. He never realized. I'm the operating system. I never stepped onto a stage. I never held a microphone. No tearful interviews. No morning show redemption arcs. No TED Talk with a lapel mic and a slideshow behind me, outlining the 5 steps to reclaiming power. That was never the point. While the world crafted their own mythologies around me, the escape queen, the Wall Street widow, the woman who vanished and rebuilt, I built something quieter, something that didn't need headlines to exist. It began with one message. A young woman, 26, wrote me after reading The Emotional Economy. Her name was Kendall. She worked in logistics, lived with her fiancé in a house she had paid for entirely. 2 months before the wedding, he'd asked her to refinance the mortgage under both names. For trust, he'd said. For unity. But something about it felt wrong. She read my chapter on The Entanglement Mirage, the section that explained how shared financial structures are sometimes used as tools of control, not love. She didn't refinance. 3 weeks later, she found messages from her fiancé to his ex, planning a future with her, financed by Kendall's house. She left, quietly, cleanly. In her message to me, she didn't ask for praise. She just wrote, I knew I wasn't crazy. Thank you for giving me the blueprint. That was the first. More followed. Some were dramatic. Covert exits from dangerous relationships, secret account withdrawals, legal maneuvers executed with silent precision. Others were simple. A woman saying no to co-signing a lease. Another negotiating her salary with the clarity of someone who understood leverage for the first time. I responded to each one, privately, personally. And then I built something else, the Aloan Collective. Not a business, a network. We had no marketing team, no public platform. It was invite-only, referral-based. Each woman who had applied a concept from my work could bring in one more, just one. It grew like roots under soil, strong, unseen, interconnected. We shared contract templates, safety plans, financial strategy checklists. We had monthly virtual roundtables, anonymous Q&A sessions, encrypted discussion boards. We never used our full names, but we knew each other better than most families. One night, I stayed on after a roundtable reviewing the chat log. Someone had dropped a note. We don't burn bridges, we build exits. I smiled. It was true. That week, I met her, Avery. She'd reached out through the collective, not to ask for help, but to offer it. She ran a program for women who had been coerced into selling their homes by partners, family, or fraudulent legal threats. She'd been one of them once, forced to sell her grandmother's cottage during a divorce she didn't see coming. Her name erased from everything she thought she owned. Her memories boxed, auctioned, and forgotten, until she built it all back under a new name with a trust structure no one could touch. We met in person at a vineyard an hour outside the city. She wore jeans, no makeup, and a scar on her chin from a car accident she never talked about. I read your book, she said. I thought I was reading about me. I wrote it about all of us, I said. We sat under the trees for hours. No agenda. She told me about her project. I told her about the collective. We didn't plan anything, but we both knew something had begun. It wasn't about revenge. It was about evolution. I never heard from Brian again until I did. It came on a Tuesday, late, a text, just a few words. Can we talk? I think I finally understand. I stared at the message for a full minute, then deleted it, not out of anger, out of release. He had nothing to offer me anymore, not closure, not guilt, not validation. Some debts aren't worth collecting. That night, I lit a fire in the hearth, not for warmth, for clarity. The flames danced softly, casting amber across the floor. I opened a new leather-bound notebook, the kind I used to buy and never write in because nothing ever felt important enough. Now I knew better. I wrote the first line slowly, deliberately. Freedom doesn't come from winning. It comes from no longer needing to prove anything. I set the pen down, not because I was done, but because I had finally started something that wasn't a reaction. It wasn't defense. It was design, and this time, the architecture was only mine. Outside, the wind moved through the trees. Somewhere in the distance, a fox cried out into the dusk. Inside, everything was still. No echoes of footsteps, no tension in the walls, no one asking me to shrink, no one asking me to give up my chair at the table because someone else was more in need. This was the sound of rebirth. It didn't roar, it whispered, and that was enough. It was, because empires don't always rise from war. Sometimes they rise from women who finally decided to stop disappearing into rooms that never saw them. Sometimes all it takes is one woman who stops apologizing for her silence and turns it into sovereignty,